I'll call it a forgotten classic. Withnail and I, the 1987 dark comedy, British dark comedy, that I think in the UK is pretty well known, but in the United States, at least among people of my acquaintance, when I look online at the numbers of people who watched this and rated this, it doesn't seem to have been watched as much as I think it ought to have been, because I think this is one of the best movies of the 1980s. And I'm sure there's all kinds of UK context for this. I want to put it in the context of my lifetime, people my age, early mid 40s, and people younger than that. This movie watches like it's a forerunner of movies like The Big Lebowski, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which I know is a Hunter S. Thompson book, but then the Terry Gilliam film, and a bunch of slacker movies and chatty movies that come in the 90s where the dialogue, the characters in the dialogue and scenarios are more important than the overall plot and some of the thematic and ideological issues. To me, this is a movie, it's a slacker movie, and Richard Linklater will make Slacker in 3 years, and a bunch of films like that will come out later. This is a movie that does that material to me very well.
I must have some booze. I demand to have some booze!
And part of that is the performance by Richard Grant, who is amazing in this as Withnail, sort of a drugged out, alcoholic, down and out actor in late 1960s London. He's rooming, has a flatmate, and that's the eye of the movie. Now, if you look online, there's a name given to this character, Marwood. I don't think in the movie there's a name given to this person. The eye, so Withnail and I, these two buddies, are flatmates. And they're sort of sick and tired of everything that's going on in their lives, including British contemporary culture, including their drug-addled lives, including their hideously disgusting a flat that they don't clean at all. So they have a long holiday in the country, and there's a classic city-country dynamic in this movie as these two guys go out to the country. It's not idealistic as they would expect.
Listen, I think you should strangle it instantly in case it starts trying to make friends with us. All right, get hold of it. You hold it down, and I'll strangle it.
And there are several situation comedy scenarios in this, maybe a string of them, and yet these are very witty situation comedies in the context of these two guys being part of a degenerating culture and being degenerate morally and socially, perhaps. In fact, that's one reason I like the movie, is this strong tone of loss, degeneracy, decline, uncertainty of going forward in the future. They're failed actors or failing actors. They have no lives. I don't know where they're getting money. They're needing to pay for drugs and booze, and yet they want to be something, whatever that something is. And yet, what would that mean? Maybe nothing. So in a way, there's a nihilistic streak to this movie. And yet it's very funny and witty and charming as well. And so I've watched it both ways, as this overall deep sadness to this movie.
Trade. Phenodihydrochloride benzoex. Street. The embalmer.
Balls, I'll swallow it and run a mile.
Like I said, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, lamenting the drug-addled culture of the time period, and the drugs did people no good. They might have been fun for a few minutes, but not over the long term. And that's the deep, dark, sad feeling of this movie. Versus this being a fairly witty comedy overall, with some fantastically quotable lines that you could memorize, and that makes this movie watchable over and over again. And when I watch this, there are hints of Henry IV Part 1, maybe. I think that's maybe a little bit here structurally. And Hamlet, which is brought up overtly in the movie. These actors, especially Grant character, wants to play Hamlet. He will recite Hamlet lines later on. That's part of the abiding sadness. And yet this character, who is he? He's a slacker. He's awful. He's disgusting. He's great. He's witty. He's a full human being, and I feel deeply sad for Withnail, as I suppose the eye does as well. Now, I mentioned the eye. To me, this movie's great trick, it's not easy to see, is that this is a personal perspective movie from the main character, the protagonist, who has a couple of voiceovers, the eye. We'll call him Marwood. He is going to, well, I'm not going to spoil the movie, but he's going to have perspective on everything that happens in the late 60s London with his friend Withnail. And I view this movie as from the eye's perspective entirely. That means this movie is about perception and the perception of a character looking on these events in retrospect and with a critical eye. I'd like people to account for this because, you know, I've read things on the internet that say, well, this movie has gay panic in it and it hasn't aged well, and there's, you know, obviously some homosexual jokes in the movie. But to me, that is from this character's perspective, who has a pretty, I would say, pretty critical view of the proceedings of his own actions and of this Withnail character who was once his flatmate.
Why don't you use a cup like any other human being?
Why don't you wash up occasionally like any other human being?
And to me, he's a neurotic writer, actually extremely neurotic in this movie. He's the more ethical, orderly type, perhaps, playing the straight man to Withnail's indulgent, degenerate, hilarious hijinks and nonsense. And that's the classic contrast here, along with this British city-country dynamic, is the orderly, ethical lifestyle versus the aesthetic lifestyle. I must bring up one of my favorites, Kierkegaard again. This is his great book, Either Or, sort of contrasted for a while, long while, the I, this Marwood character, is in this aesthetic, hedonistic lifestyle of give me drugs, booze, music, all kinds of sensual pleasures, and he feels that there is something wrong with it, something troubling about it. I think, well, actually, both characters do, but this character in particular. And so you have this clash of the aesthetic versus the sort of ethical, sort of orderly lifestyle from this neurotic writer's perspective. And so this movie, if you want to enlist it in this war, I don't know if I would, but I think about it. I can think about it this way. It's a commentary on what was the meaning of the 1960s, the cultural revolutionary things that were happening, especially drugs and alcohol, free choice, liberality for various individuals, individual groups, and even these guys seeking themselves in that context. And this movie has, like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, a strong, I feel like, negative comment on everything that goes on. Not that it has much positive to say. It's wistful about Withnail and his abilities and his wittiness and charm, and maybe about the aesthetic lifestyle that he represents. And yet, it's funny. The various characters who are drug dealers, drug addicts, are funny. But I don't view them, I don't see how you could view them as attractive in any way. Certainly, their flat absolutely disgusts me. It's hard for me to look at that. And I'll think about things like Train Spotting, for example, and other later movies, very serious downer movies, such as Darren Aronofsky's Requiem for a Dream, that really take a pretty harsh view of a drug-riddled lifestyle like these two men have in the movie. So in a way, I've made this movie seem kind of ordinary with just the dynamics, the binaries of city and country, aesthetic and ethical, drugs, no drugs, and maybe even put it in moralistic terms, but I would say the subtleties and the very, very nuanced particularities of this movie, including so many witty exchanges and witty lines that are glorious to behold, but also enrich the characters themselves. They're not just done for the sake of amusing an audience. They're done for the sake of showing a character and the potentialities of a character like Withnail, and also the I, but Withnail in particular, in showing them as fully fledged human beings. That makes me care about these guys even more so than I would, much more so than I would in any situation comedy in which the characters are very generic or basic or cliched. I mean, in one sense, they are cliched character types, but in another sense, they're fully fleshed out in all these scenarios where their speech and their speech acts give them roundedness and depth, and that's what I really appreciate about this movie. And multiple times I've seen it differently, and that's what makes me think this is a very good movie with lots of possibilities and interpretive possibilities. So that's always usually one reason I love movies like this. All that said, what do you think of Withnail and I? How has it aged? How do you view it? I put in the context of later slacker and chatty movies that I've seen that came about and were more popular. You can tell me about what it came out of or what was happening during the time, especially those of you from the UK who know more about that than I do. So please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.